This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. When I was a kid, my mom gave me a lot of graphic novels. That's actually how I learned about many famous people and their stories, like Florence Nightingale, the Wright brothers, and Marco Polo. I also remember reading The Diary of Anne Frank in elementary school, which left a profound impact that I still think about today. Graphic novels played a huge role in my reading experience. And when it comes to the steep rise in book challenges being documented by the American Library Association, graphic novels are frequent targets. Maia Kobabe's graphic novel Genderqueer was named the top challenge book of 2022 and 2021 by the organization. And the graphic novel adaptation of The Diary of Anne Frank has been banned in several school districts in Florida and Texas. Coming up, Team Services librarian Mary Richardson describes the explosion of interest in graphic novels she's seeing in Simsbury. But first, why is this format uniquely vulnerable to these kinds of requests? Here to share what they're seeing nationally is the director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom, Deborah Caldwell Stone. Thank you so much, Deb, for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
And for our listeners, if you're a comic book fan, graphic novel readers, you can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Deb, I want to start by asking about this specific format with you. What is it about graphic novels? Why are they low-hanging fruit for these sort of attacks that we're seeing today?
Frankly, because they present images, and it's right there. For anyone to see. There's less, you're not visualizing something in your mind as you do with text. You're looking at an image. And I think we've been uniquely trained to see images in a different way than we see text. And actually, there's a very long history of treating visual storytelling, graphic storytelling as low-value literature. We can think back to being told that comic books weren't good reading, were trash. And I think we carry that heritage forward to today. I remember working with actually librarians in the past who were firmly convinced that graphic novels were less than text-based. And I think anyone who's read Alison Bechdel's Fun Home or Genderqueer or similar works can see that, in fact, graphic novels are literature that should be valued and upheld in the same way as any other work of literature.
So I think I want to come back to the history in a little bit, but wanted to also point out that while graphic novels are common targets now, it's more often works about diverse lived and living experiences or by diverse authors, whether illustrative or non-illustrative. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. We've been looking at our data for the last few years, and overwhelmingly the books that are being challenged are books that deal with the lives and experiences of LGBTQIA persons, deal with their concerns. And we're also seeing a good number of books challenged because of their discussion of or treatment of race and racism in the United States as well. And so really, as a general category, books that deal with the experiences of marginalized communities, diverse books, diverse graphic novels are the ones that are most challenged these days. And we seldom see challenges to what you might call classic works. But even Shakespeare has come under attack these days. So you just never know.
And we know that the lists have played a huge part in this sort of surge of removal requests. And I know this is something we talked about the last time you were on the show, where people go down the list and basically go to their libraries and ask them to be removed. Can you talk about that? Especially, for example, we are talking about the graphic novel Genderqueer. Do you know how many of these parents have actually read the novel before they're asking for it to be banned?
Well, what we're finding is that those who demand the removal of the book from libraries frequently have not seen anything more than a few panels from the graphic novel on social media or in summaries presented by book ban groups like Rated Books or Book Looks. We've actually have noted that there are websites out there where you can click on a school district in a hot map and it provides you with a handy dandy list of bad books and instructions on how to take that list to your school board or your library board and demand the removal of books. In fact, 90% of the challenges last year in 2022 that were reported to us involved challenges to more than one title at once. 40% of those were challenges to more than 100 books. And to us, it's very clear that we're dealing with an organized campaign that's targeting entire genres of books that, these aren't books that people are, seeing their student read, their child read, looking at it, having a concern to take to a librarian or a teacher. These are organized groups demanding massive censorship of all books dealing with LGBTQ themes or dealing with sex ed or race. They're not reading these books at all. In fact, when we looked at our data for 2023, and it's preliminary data, of the 100 most challenged titles this year, 99 of those books, are listed on the censorship sites Book Looks or Rated Books. So it's clear to us where the source of the challenges are coming from.
And so as these challenges are ongoing, what you just said is it doesn't seem like it's changed much since we last had this conversation. And as these campaigns still continues, has the National Department of Education chimed in on this? What's the latest on that?
Absolutely. The Office for Civil Rights in the Department of Education has taken note of the fact that when you begin to ban books dealing with gender identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, it sends a real message to students. And in fact, it can create a hostile educational environment that the DOE is anxious to remedy. And so they're now encouraging individuals, students, parents, staff to report to the DOE, the Department of their Office of Civil Rights, any instance where book banning campaigns to remove books are creating that hostile educational environment for gay students, transgender students, students of color. And they're actually investigating that. They've now appointed person who's being called the book ban czar, but they now have appointed an assistant secretary, Matt Nosenchuk, to be in charge of investigating these instances where book banning is creating a bad environment for young people in the school community.
And joining us now to bring this conversation back home to Connecticut is Samantha Lee. She's the chair of the Connecticut Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee and the head of reference services at the Enfield Public Library. Thank you so much, Sam, for being with us again.
It's always a pleasure.
And we also have with us Douglas Lord, who's the director of the C.H. Booth Library in Newtown, and he's also the immediate past president of the Connecticut Library Association. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having CLA on.
Of course. And I want to start with Sam real quick. You've been listening to what Deborah has to say. Is what she's describing similar to what you're seeing here in Connecticut?
Absolutely. We're seeing the national trends play out locally in Connecticut challenges. In the public schools, we are absolutely seeing those targeted books for LGBT titles and authors. We're seeing a coordinated effort in schools and in public libraries challenging those titles. It is absolutely a reflection of the national scene.
And Doug, you just stepped down as president of the Connecticut Library Association, and you told Hearst, Connecticut earlier this year that you haven't seen this level of baloney with book challenges and censorship in your lifetime. Can you talk about the context behind that comment? Because it was about a challenge over 2 specific graphic novels, right?
Right, that's correct. In Newtown, the very local setting is very similar to Connecticut, very similar to the broader U.S. Connecticut is actually in the top 10 in the U.S. for number of challenges to books. And many communities, Newtown included, are just going through it, trying to figure out almost what the timbre of their community wants to be. What does the community want to reflect? Newtown, for example, has kindness. There's a whole curriculum component in Newtown about kindness, and I was really attracted to Newtown for that specific reason. And then to see the various voices coming through on the book's blankets and flamer in Newtown was pretty disheartening. But the Board of Ed is really just trying to struggle through this. The Board of Ed and the administrators are doing their best at a difficult time to try to essentially please everybody, which may or may not work in the final analysis of that.
And
it's definitely hard to see who would want to volunteer for Board of Ed in these times, in these very critical times.
right, and because we're talking about graphic novels today, and the two titles you just mentioned are graphic novels, so what are your thoughts about this format? What do you think is it about this format that's causing so much conversation going on right now?
Well, very similar to what Deborah said. It's more than just words. I mean, your mileage will vary with graphic novels because there are many different types of visual artists which have different styles and different appeals to different kinds of people. But when they're discussing sensitive topics, it's just a format that is rife for misunderstanding and in creating drama. Graphic novels are absolutely fantastic for reluctant readers, and it is very easy to take panels out of context, even in the most silly or benign of circumstances, like Pride and Prejudice and zombies, right? Like there's attraction there to get students and reluctant readers into literature, but there's also circumstances where people are gonna freak out because either they don't have anything else to freak out about, or they have some sort of hidden agenda, maybe. So while it's difficult to say, it is just a format that is that can be very difficult, especially when there's so many grown-ups making so many pronouncements about the protection of children. And essentially that's what everybody is talking about, right? Is keeping children safe, keeping students on track, not letting anything negative happen to the kids. And for what it's worth, I mean, most of the people are very concerned with that.
And because this was a debate that was happening in Newtown earlier this summer, has that debate settled, Doug? Do you have any updates there?
It is settled. They're making strides forward, and they are, coming up with some administrative paths to opt in, to opt out. Essentially, I mean, any librarian will say, please don't politicize reading or learning, but this is the climate, the landscape that we're dealing with. Will it work? It probably will work in the short term. It may not last, especially given the very sophisticated and smart degree of the students these days. They have so much to share, so much that they can lead the grown-ups and the administrators and the teachers too. So, I mean, whatever kind of rule or guideline is put down, if students want to get at these materials, they're going to get at these materials. There's no way around that.
And Sam, as we're witnessing these campaigns going on, these challenges going on, how many active book challenges have there been in Connecticut this year? Because I think last year we heard in May it was 38, which was up by almost 10 from that time last year. Have you heard this top 10 stat that Doug mentioned as well?
Oh, yeah, I've definitely heard Doug's stat there. We are seeing more challenges. We've seen consistent challenges. It was interesting because at tail end of the school year last year, there was some grumbles around the state about some challenges. And of course, since the school year was closing, those challenges took a vacation over the summer with the kids. And we're hearing about some more grumblings in various school districts, also now picking up those challenges and picking up where they left off. But I wanted to go back to what Doug had mentioned about the school district and their platform of kindness, which is really interesting to me because every school has some sort of kindness platform or anti-bullying platform. And that goes back to this understanding of tolerance. But there's the paradox of tolerance. What do you tolerate? And it's a problem because we end up wanting to be tolerant and kind to everything and everyone, including views that might be intolerant. And we get this paradox of tolerance. How much will we tolerate of the intolerance? And I think we need to change our frame of mind with that and think about it as a social construct of tolerance the social contract of tolerance, that you are protected by tolerance as long as you are also tolerant. So as soon as somebody says that they are intolerant, they are hateful, or they make accusations of another group that are unfounded, they are now no longer protected by the social contract of tolerance, and that will not be tolerated in the social setting.
And Deb, I want to bring you back real quick just to respond to what Doug and Sam has to say about these Connecticut examples. Or do you have any thoughts about Connecticut here? Is it unique? Or is it something that you're seeing across the board?
No, we're seeing these challenges in all 50 states. It's not a partisan, or it's not based on red or blue or anything like that. But what we are seeing is this kind of coordination and advancing a message that certain books are to be, this idea of are not to be tolerated, to be frank, that they have to be excluded to keep children safe. I would want to note that when we talk about keeping children safe, when we talk about parents' rights, we are actually not talking about something that's very important, and that's the young person's own right to read, their own First Amendment rights. And we neglect that conversation when we talk about these campaigns and the individuals pushing them. We need to remember that young people need to be at the center of our concern when we're talking about taking away their books, because that's what we're doing here.
And Sam, really quickly here, with what Deb just said too, can you also explain how the Connecticut Library Association supports librarians in these removal requests and how that might process differ between a school library and a public library?
So my committee, the Intellectual Freedom Committee of the Connecticut Library Association, we provide support to libraries, library workers as they're dealing with challenges. So when they get a reconsideration request, or if they're reading their community and sensing that there may be a challenge coming, our committee provides support to them. So we help them look over their reconsideration policies and procedures. We tell them to follow their policies and procedures. We help them do research on the titles that are being challenged. And we also provide support. It is a challenging time for those who are going through challenges. So we provide emotional support. We are a sounding board. We hear all their frustrations. We also help them identify colleagues and partners and community partners that would support them while they're going through a challenge, and support the retention of titles. When it comes to the differences in challenges and that process between schools and public libraries, it's quite different. So public libraries have a responsibility to protect the First Amendment right to access free speech for everybody in the community. When it comes to students, absolutely, like Deborah said, students have First Amendment rights while they are in the school building and in educational settings. So there's a delicate balance between maintaining that access in the school libraries. Courts have recognized that school boards have broad discretion over curriculum, but that's not what's happening with these challenges. These challenges are targeting school library books and are therefore targeting students' First Amendment rights to free speech.
And with what you just said too, Sam, we also know that you lean on the state's definition of obscenity in a lot of these challenges, which is also something that we have spoke about before. Can you touch on that? Is that still something that you're leaning into?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially when the arguments for challenging is using legal definitions that are taken out of context. Obscenity has a legal definition. And we do rely on that quite a bit to defend titles. The titles that are being challenged do not meet the legal definition of obscenity and therefore are protected First Amendment expressions. And it's as simple as that. We need to protect First Amendment expression.
And Doug, we're going to hear about how kids are responding to graphic novels in a little bit, but would love to just get some final thoughts from you before we move on. You know, any words of wisdom for adults who may be misunderstanding this format or may want to give it a shot, but they don't know how?
Well, I am of the opinion that most librarians are of the opinion that you should read everything, but especially the things that other people are objecting to. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, "The books that the world calls immoral are books that show the world its own shame." Now, librarians are also not about shame, but there are so many excellent graphic novels out there that are not controversial at all. They're just slices of life, just like fiction. So I would say all public libraries in Connecticut have a pretty good collection, and there's really excellent stuff out there on almost any topic. And it can be fiction, and it can also be nonfiction. Like the graphic format is a great way to describe like medical things that are going on inside your body, because it's very clear that artists have skill with that. But I would just recommend people browse, and librarians are great at helping people find what it is that they're looking for. So you can come up to a reference desk or a circ person and with this very vague idea of, I want to try a thing or do something, and the librarians will generally help you, and you'll be very pleased with the results. I guarantee.
Well, thank you so much. You've been listening to Douglas Lord, who's the director of the C.H. Booth Library in Newtown. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Doug.
Oh, thanks so much for having us on.
And you've also been hearing from Deborah Caldwell Stone, who is the head of the American Library Association Office for Intellectual Freedom. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, Deb. And we also have Sam Lee with us, who is with the Connecticut Library Association, and she will be on the show for the rest of the morning. And coming up next, though, we hear from a teen services librarian in Simsbury about why graphic novels and comic books are flying off her shelves like hotcakes. And for our listeners, if you're a graphic novel and comic book fan, you can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we're exploring the rise in book challenges librarians are fielding and why graphic novels are common targets. The American Library Association named Maia Kobabe's graphic memoir, Genderqueer, the top challenged book of 2021. And joining us now is Mary Richardson. She's a teen services librarian at the Simsbury Public Library, as well as the co-host of the Book Jam podcast. Thank you so much for jamming with us this morning, Mary.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And we still have Sam Lee with us. She's the chair of the Connecticut Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee, as well as the head of reference services at the Enfield Public Library. So, Mary, I want to jump straight to you. You know, you've been listening along this hour. Let's talk specifically about Maia Kobabe's graphic memoir, Genderqueer. What are your thoughts about this being a common target?
I think that because of a couple of panels, there is a more conservative group out there that has just taken those completely out of context, like what Doug was saying earlier. And it's so interesting because when I think about that, I actually read that book when it was published. I remember ordering it. I was at a different library. And I remember when I ordered it, I was like, because I used to order all the graphics for every department in that library because it was much smaller. I remember thinking, oh, I know some kids that are going to read this and see themselves, or like, you know, get a lot out of this because they're on their gender journey. And I just put it on the shelf and never made a comment, and it would just like occasionally shirk, and it was fine. But I also wondered, if someone's ever going to challenge this, because I can see a certain perspective not being tolerant of this at all. And again, when I think about this book, the panel that I always think about is not any of the incendiary stuff that you see that gets passed around on social media and called obscenity. It's actually there's a I think it's almost a full page panel, and it's basically the author as a teen in a snail shell. And every segment has all of these questions about their identity. And because Maia Kobabe uses these pronouns. And I remember reading that and thinking, like, this is so relatable, because even if you aren't questioning your sexuality or your gender, you still like, who am I? Like, what am I doing? Because like those teen years are totally a time to try on different identities. Like, are you a sports kid? Maybe you'll do the school play. Like, oh my God, do I like emo music? Oh no, I like pop music. Like, it's just, you can try on all these different things because you're still trying to figure out who you are as a person. And that one page panel, the illustration on it was so relatable. I was just like, this book is amazing.
Well, and I love that you say that, because I read the memoir as well, and it's a memoir. It's about Maia's experience and her their questions of themselves as they're growing and learning, as well as their family and friends learning and growing with Maia. And I was definitely an emo kid for sure, but I'm sure a lot of my friends probably would have appreciated to read something like Genderqueer when we were teens. And talking about teens too, Mary, shifting the focus here a little bit from how adults often misinterpret them, as you were saying with certain panels, and what Doug was saying earlier too. How do you see kids respond to graphic novels and comic books? Are they surprising to you, or are you like, that's totally on point?
I grew up as a comic book kid, so I come to this pretty like openly. Like when I became a public librarian, because I used to work in academia, like I was like, no, you should all be buying graphic novels. Why are you not? Like, I've always been a big proponent of it, because like I see kids like just grab them off the shelf and like read them. Like my number one, probably everybody's number one graphic novel right now, if it's not manga, is going to be the Heartstopper series, because right when it dies down, a new season drops, and people just like, kids like lose their minds over it, because they're so excited for it. Because also like we don't really have a lot of great teen programming that's like made for teens, and there's definitely a very teen perspective in that show, and it's also just incredibly sweet. And the fact that the first volume was actually it's on the Nutmeg noms for a high school list for this year in Connecticut too. Like, it's just, everybody loves it. It's so good. Alice Osman can't write a bad book. Like, she's great.
Well, and as we were preparing for this show too, and I shared at the top of the hour that I grew up with a lot of graphic novels, and as we were thinking about this, honestly, those were what were memorable for me. I mean, to this day, I can tell you moments that I remember from Florence Nightingale or The Diary of Anne Frank. And so it has an impact, and a good impact. And we know that graphic novels and comic books are engaging kids, especially now at a higher vocabulary level. So not just retaining the stories, but vocabulary as well. Can you talk about that?
Oh, yeah. Like every summer, I always like joke that I have to tap the poster. There's a Jarrett Lerner who does graphic novels for kids, did a really cool infographic poster, and I think I sent it to your producer, where he talks about like the actual vocabulary gained by reading graphic novels. And also just like how if your kid is reading a book that's for their age, quote unquote, the graphic novel is still going to be a little bit higher. And also how your brain interacts with a visual manifestation of the written word is a little bit different than if you're looking at like a non-illustrative work. Like neither one is like bad or good. Like they're both great. Like I'm not trying to say like graphic novels are better, because I'm not. That's a false argument. No, thank you. They're both great, but I'll have like parents who are like, well, I want my kid to read something that are not graphic novels, and I'm just like, why? And they're like, well, because I want them to read real books. I'm like, graphic novels and manga are real books. They have like some of these books have real experiences because they're memoirs or they're historical retellings. Like we have a graphic novel adaptation of Anne Frank's diary. Right. There's a graphic novel adaptation of Slaughterhouse-Five that's amazing. There's all this stuff that you can do, and like I'm always like, don't make me top the sign, because realistically too, if it's summer, like your kid probably has a summer reading assignment, great, get that over with early, and then let your kids read whatever they want. Because my job as a librarian, aside from programming, is also to help instill a lifelong love of reading. And if graphic novels are the way to that, we're going to do it. I'm going to jump on that train. Like, sure, if I have a kid that's like, Mary, we don't have the new Demon Slayer, I'm like, we're going to get the next volume. I will not buy One Piece, though. That's just a space issue. There's over 100 volumes.
I was actually just recommended Demon Slayer, so nice to know that there are 100 of them that I'm looking forward to
No,
soon.
that's One Piece. Sorry.
Clarification, One Piece, but also Demon Slayer is a long series as well. But who else is on that train? It's Jerry Craft. He is a Connecticut native and comic book artist, and he spoke about this while on Connecticut Public's weekly talk show Disrupted earlier this year. Let's take a quick listen.
When I was a kid, the one thing I absolutely hated to do was to read books. I did not become a reader until I was an adult, basically, with kids of my own, because then I started reading them bedtime stories because I wanted them to embrace books in a way that I never had. You know, when you're not a reader, I always say, well, what would have made me a reader? One is finding mirrors, finding a kid who looked like me, acted like me, but, you know, it's not depressing. You know, that was one. And the other was in the graphic novel format. I think that kids who are more visual learners can really get so much more, you know, like for people who say, oh, graphic novels aren't real books, you know, it's like it stimulates two sides of your brain because the kid can read the pictures. I mean, look at the pictures, decide what's going on, look at the words, and then depending on how those go together, it could mean something completely different, you know? So there's a whole lot more to graphic novels than people think. And it's not like all of a sudden when I'm writing a graphic novel, I don't concern myself with plot and character arc and story arc. Of course, I put all that stuff in there. So I think that for people like, well, my kid only reads graphic novels. What do I do? Like, let them, because they're reading. That's like saying, oh, my kid only eats vegetables. Well, okay, they're eating healthy.
Mary, what's your response to Jerry here?
He's 100% right. Like, those are all of the things. Also, if you haven't read the New Kids series, you totally should. It's great. But yeah, it's yeah. I mean, and sometimes you'll have a kid that's like, oh, I read all these graphic novels, but I also want to read like a non-illustrative work. What do you got? And I'm like, great, cool. Like, we have more books for you. And then we have some kids who are just like, no, I'm reading this book and this is my jam, you know? And I often find a lot of kids that are really into manga don't want to read graphic novels because that's the art style that they like.
Right.
And that's where they feel comfortable. But also, just like adults can be stubborn about what books they like, kids can be too. And it's always the whole thing of like trying to like slowly kind of gently open them up to something else and a new experience, which graphic novels also do so very well.
Sure. And Mary, I don't know if this is something that you have seen, but with kids who are loving graphic novels or manga, you know, are you seeing their parents opening to that too? Are they reading it together? Because I've certainly heard a lot of parents who are like, oh, my kid's really into that, so let me give it a go. You know, have you seen that?
Yeah, actually, I see it more, I feel like, in the past couple of years than I did like 10 years ago when I first started. Because I think that we as a society have like come maybe like turned a 90-degree corner on how we feel about graphic novels for the most part. And I think also educators using them in the classroom as well has been very helpful. And you know, graphics are also great for kids with learning disabilities because like it makes decoding so much easier, like all the stuff that Jerry Craft was talking about. And how you engage with a graphic novel is not always the same for everybody. Like my brother is older than me, and so like that's where I got my love of comics was from him and stealing his comic books when I wasn't supposed to. But like we had a whole talk one time about like how we engage in them because I always read the text first because I'm such a text-driven person, and then I look at the pictures. He would always look at the pictures first and then read the text or the dialogue, which I was just like, wow, because neither one of us had thought about it. And then I started kind of paying more attention to like what people are talking about, like when they're engaging with them. But yeah, so I think it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, that is so fascinating because like we do all kind of see it differently, even though we're looking at the same thing. And Sam, you've been listening to this conversation as well. You know, what else would you like to add to this?
I love Jerry Craft saying that like if your kid's reading, just let them read whatever they're enjoying. Because at the moment you make reading a chore through the summer reading program, you kill the joy out of it. And there's nothing worse and stunting to a child than to tell them that, no, they can't read that because it's too young, or kids will find a way. They will find a way to read and get joy out of it. But as soon as you take the joy away from it and turn it into a chore, you ruin that love of reading. You ruin the chance to encourage curiosity and self-edification. I love it when I see a kid just rip through the library and a parent encouraging that, because yeah, they might find something that's a little older for them. They might find something that's a little younger for them. But it's up to the kid to decide. And isn't it such a beautiful thing to encourage a kid to read voraciously and discover a world on their own and encourage that sense of curiosity than it is to shut them down and eliminate those possibilities for them.
And Sam, we've been focusing a lot about younger readers, and because we also know that many of these illustrative books about puberty are also sometimes common targets, especially, as we're having this conversation today. Can you distinguish this genre from the formats that we're talking about, and why is this troubling?
So there's graphic novel nonfiction, which does, and there are the books that cover puberty and the like, but there's also graphic nonfiction memoirs. Like Doug said, there's books that cover medical conditions in graphic novel format. And all of that is just to convey information in a medium that is easy to consume and not intimidating. When it comes to the puberty books, I think, oh my gosh, what I would have given to have one of those when I was growing up, because puberty is awkward for everyone. It is not a good time. But having the privacy of a book, having the intimacy of a book, and a very objective narrator guiding you through that process through a book, and normalizing all of that is so empowering. And I think that gets lost in the noise, that when we are talking about these books and somebody is saying that they're obscene, what they're forgetting about is the good that these books can do and eliminating the shame. I think back always to Mr. Rogers, who said, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And for kids, that is huge. The moment you mention puberty, the moment you mention the need for deodorant with body odor or pads and tampons, it's a moment that eliminates the shame and makes it manageable. Not given the opportunity to encounter these puberty books means that there's no opportunity for them to eliminate the shame. And we just don't need that as a society. We don't need to be ashamed of our bodies anymore.
And really quickly here, Mary, what are your thoughts about puberty books?
Oh yeah, they definitely have a place at the library. In basically 100% everything that Sam just said, it is a super awkward, weird time. And I know some of the challenges too on some of these books are not just because they are illustrative, but also because they include LGBTQ plus or LGBTQIA plus themes, and like that hasn't really been seen in those type of like how. Sorry, I'm stumbling my words. Hasn't really been seen in this type of books until like the past like maybe 10 years. And you can look and see what's challenged overall in the top 10 book challenges, and you'll see a theme there.
You've been listening to Connecticut librarians Mary Richardson and Sam Lee, who'll be staying with us. We'll continue this conversation about graphic novels after a quick break. You can also give us a call, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we're focused on graphic novels and comic books. Are you a fan? Let us know. 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. And back with us are Connecticut librarians Mary Richardson and Sam Lee. So, Mary, we've been talking about there's been this huge interest, this huge explosion you've observed over the last decade in terms of graphic novels, as well as the market of books. Can you tell us what you're seeing?
publishers have figured out that kids love graphic novels, and so we're getting a huge push for them. Is really so it's like the intersection of art and capitalism as it comes together. But I think that's part of it. Because like I remember like maybe like 8 years ago, I feel like we didn't have as many like middle grade graphics as we do now. And it's just boomed. And also like you look at like the publishers, I can't remember, there's like a publishing group that or somebody that tracks like the stuff and like the you actually don't see superhero trade like graphic novels come in until like maybe around 50 of the top 100 of sets that's sold every year. If you're just looking at the graphic novels, it's all Dogman and all that kind of stuff in the top 10,
Right.
which is great. But I also think on the other side of it too, you've got this. I listened to a podcast recently called Soul to Story, which talked about like the science of reading and how like a lot of kids aren't getting phonics in their schools, they're getting sight reading instead. And so that's creating like a reading struggle because not all kids can deal with the sight word situation. And it also got into like the neuroscience of like how reading happens and whatnot, and just like how this happened across the country in the US. And I was like, oh, anecdotally, I wonder if that's also why graphic novels are so huge, because you have a kid that struggles to read, but you give them a graphic and they feel more comfortable. And like, that's the whole thing, right? If you struggle to read, but you can read a graphic novel, you want to try and like bolster that confidence and get that kid feeling comfortable. Because if you're reading and it's always a challenge and it feels hard, like you're not going to do it. You're going to go do something else. So.
Right. And even just as a consumer, I see the walls of manga explode as I age. And because when I was a teenager, there certainly was not that many translated mangas available. I think Teenage Cat probably would have had a much better time in high school if that was available to me. And with what you just said, too, with the various sciences behind perhaps graphic novels is a great tool for kids. Do you find that illustrative works are a way to eventually engage kids in non-illustrative works? Like, is that something that you're seeing at all?
Sometimes I always feel like every teen is like a case by case basis because they all have like what they like to read and what they don't like to read. And yeah, I have actually had a middle schooler like come to me and who I knew was just a straight up manga reader and like came to me and was like, hey, I want to start the school year off a little bit differently. I want to challenge myself. Can you recommend some non-illustrative works? And of course, like they didn't use those terms. That's just me talking. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. And so I was like, let me give you like 5 books because I kind of know what you like. I kind of don't know what you like. And also like if the pacing isn't fast enough for you, like just go to the next book. Because I always try and send a teen home with more than one because like, there's not enough time in the world to spend on reading a book you're not engaged with. Like, just go to the next one. It's fine. And so, they came back like the next week and were like, oh my God, I love this book. It was so great. And I was like, okay, cool. But then also, will ask me like, oh, hey, do you have the new volume of like, Blue Lock or something? And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's on its way. So, it goes back and forth. There's room for both.
Sure. And as you're saying that, I'm actually remembering that. So when I was in, I want to say like 5th grade, I was obsessed with this manga series called Case Closed. And that actually eventually led to a lifelong obsession with Sherlock Holmes. And you can argue whether or not that's classic literature, but that's certainly classic crime fiction. So I'm just going to leave that there with you as you're saying that, Mary. And can you also we talked about parents being involved and where parents are concerned. We also chatted about the temptation to sort of manage kids' reading. So you have this theory about why kids might reread a beloved title over and over again. Can you talk about why it's important to allow that?
Oh, yeah. Sam kind of touched on this a little bit when she was talking, but yeah, so from my perspective, middle school is like not great, right? It's awkward. Like we are in full swing puberty. There's social hierarchies. Like everything is changing, right? Everything that you knew a couple of years ago is changing. And then like right when you kind of get it down, you have to go into high school and everything changes again. And you're like, oh God, what is all this? And so a lot of times you'll see a kid that's like rereading the Percy Jackson series for like the umpteenth time. And like I'll have like a parent that's frustrated about it. I'm like, nope, let them read it because A, they love reading that book. B, they get older, that book stays the same age. So they will actually get different things out of it because I know when I read a book, as I age, I often get different perspectives. But the other thing too is that there's a safety in that book, right? That book doesn't change. Everything around me is changing. But this one thing that I love, Percy stays the same, right? Mm-hmm. Like I will age a little bit with him, but like at the same point, like some point Percy will be younger than me and I will be older. But that's okay because the story is always the same. And that's something that you can count on. And like between everything being so online and like, global historical events happening every 20 minutes right now. Like the safety of having a tried and true book that's your very favorite thing, whether it's Case Closed, a great manga series, it's awesome, or the Percy Jackson series, like that's where we're at, I think.
And Sam, I want some final thoughts from you as we only have a couple minutes here. But I feel like the theme of today's conversation too is like, man, being a teenager is awkward. It's not a good time. Books are really important for this time period. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, my own experience as a teenager, I ran into American Born Chinese by Jean Lewin Yang. And what a perfect book. That book just found its audience with me and my brother, because as soon as I read it, I handed it off to him. Like talking about the puberty experience, the adolescent experience, but also the Chinese American adolescent experience. That was a book that was transformational. And I was able to point to and say, okay, it's awkward. It's not great, but there it is. And I'm not alone. And that felt amazing. And that made me feel less alone. And having a graphic novel do that, and having graphic novels available to do that to all sorts of people, I think it's worth protecting.
And Mary, we've been talking about, all kinds of things related to graphic novels today. Is there something that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share?
Not really. I think we hit most of the high points. But yeah, like read graphic novels, they're amazing. Like where I work in Simsbury, we've got like our children's collection downstairs. There's the teen collection upstairs. We have a split between manga and graphics, and we also have an adult collection too. And like, there's just no lack of great things to read right now. Like I just read like the newest Batman. I'm loving it. But then I also went and finally read Kate Beaton's Ducks, which was like an Eisner winning graphic novel memoir from like, I think a year or two ago. So like there's so much good stuff. Like I cannot just go read a book. If you don't have a library card, get a library card, check out some graphic novels. You'll be a better person for it.
And really quickly here, too, because we've been talking a lot about kids wanting to read more books after their foray into graphic novels. I know you're in the youth section, but are you seeing adults wanting to read more classics or non-illustrative works if they have delved into graphic novels?
Oh, yeah. I feel like every library I've been at in the past like 10 years of my career as a public librarian, I've built an adult graphic novel collection because there's so much stuff coming out now. Or there's some stuff that I'm like, this is a little bit too much to fit in the teen section, because I do have like fifth and sixth graders that will come up and grab stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I don't need all that blood and gore. We'll put that in the adult section. But and those are also books that are like Image, for example, is a publisher that produces a lot of like adult graphic novels. Like Saga is a good example of like one of their titles. But yeah, so we started building this collection. There was a little bit on the shelf when I got here, but we're definitely seeing it kind of like slowly uptick. Is it at the level of like the general like adult fiction collection? No, but it's also a much smaller collection, and I think it's working pretty well. And I'm always like, oh, hey, did you know we have this collection? And adults are like, wait, what? And then I'm also finding some of my older high school teens are starting to find that collection too as they're aging into it. And yeah, I think it's pretty great. I also want to say one of the things I strongly believe is that teens will often self-select for themselves. So like there's the whole thing that we've talked about, like adults trying to like, keep kids safe. Kids know what they can handle and what they can't. And they actually will tell you. So, and like they're not gonna, like it's cool. Kids have the freedom to read too.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Mary. We have Mary Richardson and Sam Lee, who are both Connecticut librarians. Thank you so much for being on Where We Live this morning.
Thank you. We had a great time.
Thank you.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you so much for listening.